In the second episode, we will explore my father's qualifications to write a scientific book about spirituality. Before this, he wrote an extremely scientific book called The Integrated Theory of Consciousness, which is the basis for this book. Genesis 3.0, Creation Update, What Moses Could Not Tell Us That Science Now Can, retooled the information from the first book, and we wrote it for the general reader. As for me, I have published several articles in academic journals, taught at 2 universities, and authored several books. We will also find out the depth of my father's peak experience and who else has had one. Finally, we will find out what the absolute need for a creative force is. So there's a lot of science in this book. You've researched a lot of science, but what makes you qualified to not only write this book, but to tell us that it is real, that you're right?
I learned a great deal of science as I was going through my schooling, but that was more of a confusion for me than enlightenment because I was being told by my religion that God created the universe and well, God didn't even really get into the evolution of the universe back in my early days when I was in a religious experience, when I was living my religion. But there was all of this confusion, science telling me one thing in opposition to what religion was telling me. And I was in a real state of depression, angst, um, as I was going through my early adulthood years because of this contradiction between science and religion. Science was winning out because uh, I was I consider myself a scientist.
Well, and let's stick with that for just a minute.
Okay,
Tell us more about your scientific qualifications.
okay. Well, in my quest for learning everything that I could know, which was part of what I was doing, at an early age, I had a strong compulsion to learn about everything. I wanted to know about everything. And so I studied a lot of science, even beyond what I was mandated to learn going through pre med and medicine.
And what medicine did you practice?
Um, I became a specialist in the field of radiology and nuclear medicine. They are two separate certified parts of medicine. I became certified in radiology in 1968, nuclear medicine in 1972. Uh, but by,
So, how many years have you been a doctor?
well, I practiced medicine for 54 years.
And so
I,
you've got 54 years of practicing scientific medicine
yes,
on top of the research that you've done looking into what the rest of the book is about.
yes. And I've also been able to correlate the science outside of medicine with science within medicine. I have taken so many courses outside of medicine with all different scientific modes or divisions in science, like cosmology, um, quantum mechanics, physics, chemistry, zoology, biology in general, um, with probably about 30 different divisions of scientific understanding, uh, because most scientists who are practicing science, doing experimentation, become extraordinarily well versed in their single scientific division, but don't know a whole lot about other divisions throughout the scientific world.
So you're able to bridge these different divisions together and show how they're interconnected and interrelated then.
Yeah, and they are on the grand scheme they are, but again, there is so much information out there that even in one discipline of science, you can't learn all of it. You can you hardly scratch the surface of all of the information in each of the divisions, let alone putting it all together in one concept where you have an understanding of all of the disciplines in a coherent fashion. Uh, and then there's information outside of science that has to also be included in this understanding of reality. And
And that's what you've been able to do in Genesis 3.0, is to take this outside understanding and integrate it then with the scientific understanding.
yeah, and a lot of it comes from spiritual understanding, which is also married to the science. Um,
Now, you say spiritual. What's the difference between spiritual and religious?
okay, spiritual is more broad. Religion is broken up into denominations with a lot of contradictions. Depending on what religion you are in, it says one thing, another religion says another thing, which
So,
apparently contradicts. And it's more of a rigid um, construction where you have rules and regulations within the religion that is part of the religion that you are um, encouraged to follow.
so spirituality then transcends all of these divisions to
Yes,
include the whole without the
yes,
division.
yes,
Okay.
yes. And I had a spiritual experience, transformative experience, um, when I was 41 years old, which was best described as a peak experience by Abraham Maslow, who was one of the most predominant psychologists um, who studied what he called peak experience back through the 50s and 60s primarily, 1950s, 1960s primarily.
And was this an epiphany that you experienced, or what was this transformative
Okay,
experience?
way beyond an epiphany. It was a state of superconsciousness where the perception was that I was entirely omniscient. And by that I mean I had a complete, total understanding of absolutely everything. There were no contradictions. There was a complete understanding of apparent contradictions between, say, spiritual concepts and science. Suddenly, I had the understanding of why there were these apparent contradictions when in reality they aren't. If you know enough about science, if you know enough about spiritual principles, they all merge. They are two different belief systems which merge together and complement each other, verify each other, and the way they fit together are just absolutely beautiful. Uh, Now, I'm calling it a peak experience as defined by Abraham Maslow, but different cultures have come up with different words to say the same thing or refer to the same thing. They've been called mystical experiences, spiritual experiences, religious experiences, quintessential experiences. Um, the Hindus would call it samadhi, Buddhists would call it satori, or even nirvana. Uh, Others have said absorption. I mean, there are all of these different word descriptions of the same thing.
So, who are some of the other notable individuals who have had an experience similar to yours?
Other people who I'm convinced had superconsciousness experiences, even pinnacle experiences, would include Moses, Christ, Buddha, Mohammed, and other people, spiritual people down through the ages, Meister Eckhart. In this day and age, I think that, well, as far as superconsciousness experiences are concerned, they are quite limited.
Can you take just a minute and tell us what this absolute need for a creative force is?
Entropy, in a brief sentence, would indicate that everything in the universe is breaking down. All life forms, all physical non-life forms break down over time. Uh, they are created or made, or they evolve. They exist for whatever period of time that they're supposed to, and then they break down and disintegrate, dust to dust. This is an opposing force against creation. And even if you started forming some relatively complex molecules, entropy would wipe them out. So you got entropy going against the buildup from simplicity to complex forms, in particular life forms, that uh, entropy is such a overwhelming process that's occurring throughout the universe with everything, it would stop the formation from simple to complex before it even was able to get off the ground.
So, what you're saying then is if we were able to beat the odds and come up with that first molecule, that entropy would wipe it out before it could replicate and evolve to something more complex. So, we've taken the first odds, and then we have to face those odds a second time with entropy. And so we have to keep stacking those odds up that are against us, which, as you say, make it impossible for
Very,
this to have happened without some kind of a guiding force behind it pushing evolution forward.
yes, absolutely. Stated very well, by the way. Um, and then I think that there is also very strong evidence that the evolution from simple to complex has occurred exponentially. It started out very slow, simple celled one cell organisms, and then built upon that, amoebas became a more complex organism. Multiple tiny amoebas can all coagulate together to form a larger structure that has higher properties that exist within this complicated body of amoebas, which has come together. But
And then science is now catching up with the realization that, or the acceptance that the odds against unguided evolution, that it just can't happen, that there has to be something there. So now is the time to bring in your understanding that you've had and written about for over 40 years to the rest of the public so that it adds to that discussion of where science is going and society is going with their understanding.
yes, and again, bringing in the concept of the exponential um, evolution from simple to complex, meaning that the the moving from simple to complex has happened on an accelerated basis where it gets faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And if you follow a curve that paleontology has come up with, uh, along with geology, where different strata within the earth start out with low layers of sediment with these very simple complex, there's very simple organisms that by today's standards are not complex at all. Next layer, a little more complex, next layer, a little more complex. They can date where these organisms originated or when they were alive. You have this this acceleration of of complexity, and if you have, let's use Isaac Newton's second law of motion, force equals mass times acceleration. If you have an acceleration, this indicates that there has to be a force for the acceleration to continue as an acceleration. If the force is removed, then whatever you're talking about is moving at a steady velocity or speed. It's not becoming faster and faster. So since evolution from simple to complexity has been happening faster, 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 there needs to be a force for that to happen.
And we're in science and society getting to that point where we see and recognize that.
Yeah, I think that paleontology, anthropology, archaeology, all of these things are pointing to the acceleration of evolution occurring exponentially.
And that's why you wrote the book today.
Yeah, science is now coming up with all of the reasons why science alone cannot begin to explain reality as we now experience it. It really requires a creative mind. Science, which has developed over the last 20 or more years, is showing us all of the reasons why this could not have occurred by chance. And this is there are more and more scientists that are seeing the need for this creative force, that it could not have occurred by chance. And now is the time to write this book because of the limited number of scientists, but yet scientists, well-renowned scientists who have contributed in their own lane some of the greatest understanding of whatever their section of science maintains. And so we have now some very brilliant scientists coming out and saying there's got to be a creative force, a universal mind behind our creation and evolution. It just has to be. Eventually, as the older scientists die out and are replaced by younger scientists, that this is what it's going to be time that's going to change this understanding and reveal more and more of the concepts that I wrote about that many years ago.